tengo un coche.
Zen.
20 films across 14 countries, 11 languages, and 6 decades of cinema. All of them sitting in streaming catalogs waiting for the audience willing to look past the algorithm's first 3 recommendations. From a Taiwanese family slowly dismantled by one night's choices to a Finnish cave diving documentary about loyalty in the most extreme possible circumstances. From Tom Stoppard's existential Shakespeare comedy to a low-budget sci-fi dinner party that will make you question reality for days afterward. A Brazilian trafficking thriller. A Danish dispatcher confined to his desk. Volcanologists who literally died doing what they loved. 20 films, every single one of them genuinely worth your time. Let's get into it. Number 1. A Son, 2019. The Chen family occupies the film's 4 main roles with the specificity of a novelist. A hard father who has built his identity around his academically successful older son, A-ho. The troubled younger son, A-ho, who is serving time in a youth correction facility after a terrible crime. A mother who holds the middle ground between them, and a girlfriend whose pregnancy arrives as the final weight in an already collapsing structure. Director Chung Mong-hong shoots with a visual discipline and a patience that gives each family member's private suffering room to breathe before the film brings them back into the same frame. Chen Yi-wen as the father delivers one of the most fully realized performances in contemporary Taiwanese cinema. A man whose emotional rigidity is not coldness, but a specific and ultimately self-defeating form of love. A Son won 6 Golden Horse Awards in 2019 and is available on Netflix internationally, where it generates almost no conversation. It is a masterpiece of family drama that operates on a register of accumulating, quietly devastating emotional weight that the genre's more celebrated entries rarely achieve. From a Taiwanese family drama about the cost of expectation, What Follows is an Indian film about a different kind of devotion, not to family, but to an art form, and to the terrifying question of whether one's devotion is matched by genuine gift. Number 2, The Disciple, 2020. Sharad Narulkar has given his life to Hindustani classical music, studying under his guru since childhood, disciplining every part of his existence around the demands of the tradition, measuring himself against the recorded voice of a legendary singer his guru considers the pinnacle of the form. Chaitanya Tamhane's film follows Sharad over 20 years of this devotion, and its central question is one that the film refuses to answer with false comfort. Does the depth of one's commitment guarantee the depth of one's gift? The Disciple is one of the few films to have examined the specific terror of artistic devotion without romanticizing it, the way a life organized entirely around excellence in a single form becomes a trap when the excellence does not arrive, or arrives only partially. Aditya Modak as Sharad carries 20 years of incremental disappointment and self-questioning, with a restraint that mirrors the music's own formal demands. Produced by Alfonso Cuarón and selected as India's entry for the International Film Oscar. Available on Netflix with almost no visibility. From an Indian film about devotion to artistic perfection, What Follows is a French film about a life that appears perfect and the single obsession that dismantles it. Number 3, The Player, 2014. A young French man with a seemingly controlled, successful life carries a gambling compulsion that operates as a structural fault beneath the surface, invisible in the day-to-day but capable, when activated under pressure, of bringing everything down. The film traces the escalation from recreational risk to genuine crisis with the formal discipline of a thriller that understands the specific mechanics of compulsion, not the big moment of transgression, but the accumulated small decisions that make the big moment inevitable. The French psychological thriller tradition has been producing work of this quality for decades without significant English language recognition, and The Player is representative of what the genre does at its best. A claustrophobic examination of a single personality's self-destruction, stylishly shot and building toward an inevitability that the audience can see arriving before the protagonist does. The film's dark psychological edge and its commitment to following the logic of its protagonist's disorder without flinching makes it a genuinely difficult and genuinely rewarding watch. From a French film about reality fracturing under personal pressure, What Follows is a film where reality literally fractures for 8 people at a dinner party during an astronomical event. Number 4, Coherence, 2013. Eight friends gather for a dinner party on the night a comet passes unusually close to Earth. The power goes out. A strange house with lit windows appears in the neighborhood, a house that shouldn't exist. And what follows is a masterpiece of low-budget sci-fi horror constructed almost entirely from the improvisational performances of its cast and James Ward Byrkitt's meticulous screenplay, which was withheld from the actors to preserve the genuine confusion and anxiety their characters need to experience. The film's formal constraint: one house, one night, eight people, essentially no special effects budget, is its greatest asset. Coherence achieves its sense of fractured, multiplied reality entirely through performance, implication, and the specific quality of dread that arrives when ordinary people confronting extraordinary circumstances cannot agree on what they are seeing. It is one of the most inventive, low-budget science fiction films ever produced and remains one of the most discussed films in the genre's dedicated communities. Available on multiple platforms and still generating new audiences 15 years after its release. From eight friends whose reality fractures at a dinner party, what follows is one man in a single room who must hold an entirely different kind of reality together through sound and imagination alone. Number 5. The Guilty, 2018. Asger Holm is a police officer assigned to the Emergency Dispatch Center as a placeholder while an internal investigation into his own conduct proceeds. On an ordinary shift, he receives a call from a woman who is clearly under duress and possibly kidnapped, and who cannot speak freely. What he has available to him: a telephone, the dispatch database, his own judgment, and the rules that govern what a dispatcher can authorize. Gustav Müller's film is almost entirely confined to the desk where Asger works, and it is one of the most intensely suspenseful films produced in any language in the decade of its release. Jakob Katergren as Asger carries the film through sound design and facial expression, a performance of enormous technical discipline, in which the entire external action of the film is conveyed through what Asger hears and what his face reveals about what he hears. The Guilty demonstrates with complete conviction that formal constraint is a creative resource rather than a limitation, and that an almost entirely auditory cinema can generate more visual tension than most action films. Essential viewing. From a single room and a single voice, what follows is a film that demonstrates the same principle of formal economy applied to the history of an entire Broadway production. Number 6. Fiddler, A Miracle of Miracles, 2019. The history of Fiddler on the Roof, how a Jerome Robbins choreographed musical about Jewish life in Tsarist Russia, opened in 1964, was considered potentially too specific and too Jewish for mainstream audiences, and became the longest-running Broadway show of its era before entering the global cultural consciousness, is the story that Max Lukowicz's documentary tells. But the film's real subject is why certain art endures, what the production tapped into about tradition and change, and the terror of the world reshaping itself faster than human beings can adapt. The documentary is particularly interesting in its examination of how the musical has been claimed by communities across the world who see their own specific history and material that appears initially to belong to a very particular culture. The Japanese production that has been running for decades, the Israeli production, and the complicated relationship it creates. Fiddler, A Miracle of Miracles is a film about art's portability across cultures and across time, and about why some stories persist when most do not. From art that endures across decades, what follows is about human beings who endured something nearly impossible. Three men, held in brutal isolation for 12 years, and what kept them alive. Number 7. A 12-Year Night, 2018. Three Tupamaro political prisoners in Uruguay, José Mujica, Eleuterio Fernández Huidobro, and Mauricio Rosenkopf, were held in conditions of extreme isolation by the military dictatorship for 12 years, moved constantly between locations to prevent the international community from locating them, kept in cells with minimal light, minimal human contact, and no sense of how long the imprisonment would last. Alvaro Bregner's film reconstructs this period with a formal rigor that mirrors the prisoner's own experience. Time becomes elastic, reality becomes uncertain, and survival requires the construction of an interior life independent of external reality. Antonio de la Torre, Alfonso Tor, and Chino Darin play the three men with a physical commitment that the film's conditions demand. Performances measured in the micro changes of men who have almost nothing to change. The film is devastating and occasionally transcendent in equal measure, and the postscript that reveals what Mujica went on to become after his release gives the 12 years a weight that is almost impossible to process. One of the finest historical films produced in Latin America. From three men who sustained their identities through total isolation, what follows is about a man who created an entirely new identity, and what happened to both of them as a result. Number 8. Being Frank. The Chris Seavey Story, 2019. Chris Seavey was a musician, comedian, artist, and father who invented Frank Sidebottom, a character with a giant papier-mâché head who performed original songs and delivered surreal local comedy in the Manchester area, and devoted an increasing proportion of his life to Frank at the expense of nearly everything else. Steve Sullivan's documentary is simultaneously a portrait of genuine creative genius, a portrait of compulsion that borders on self-destruction, and a portrait of a family that loved a man who could not quite give them enough of himself because Frank was always requiring the remainder. The film benefits enormously from the archival materials Seavey left behind. He documented his own life obsessively, and from the testimonies of his children and collaborators who loved him and are still figuring out how to account for him. Being Frank inspired the 2014 film Frank with Michael Fassbender, which uses the character as a departure point rather than a portrait. The documentary is more complex and more painful than the fiction film because it is dealing with the actual cost. Available on streaming platforms and almost entirely undiscovered. From a man who built an elaborate persona and lived partly inside it, what follows is about a detective whose internal landscape makes his external investigations considerably more complicated. Number 9. Hit. The First Case, 2020. Vikram Rudraraju is an officer in the homicide intervention team in Hyderabad who is investigating the disappearance of a young woman while simultaneously managing a PTSD condition that erupts at specific triggers and makes his professional functioning genuinely precarious. Sailesh Kolanu's Telugu film is a crime thriller that understands the genre's investigative pleasures without losing sight of what makes the central character actually interesting. Not his skill, but the specific fragility that complicates it. Vishwak Sen as Vikram brings a physical and psychological specificity to a role that lesser genre films would have treated as simple competence. A detective who is very good at his work in between the moments when his own history makes that work nearly impossible. The First Case is a solid, well-constructed Indian genre film that uses its Hyderabad setting with enough specificity to feel embedded in a real place rather than a genre abstraction. Available on Netflix, where it generated minimal conversation outside its primary Telugu language audience. From a detective investigating the dangerous while managing his own interior fragility, what follows is about two people who investigated something dangerous and fell in love with it entirely. Number 10. Fire of Love, 2022. Katia and Maurice Kraft were French volcanologists who met in the late 1960s, fell in love, got married, and spent the next 2 decades filming and studying volcanoes together. They were killed in June 1991 in the eruption of Mount Unzen in Japan. Sarah Dosa's documentary is assembled from their own footage, thousands of hours of material they shot over 20 years, and constructs from that material a film about the specific quality of a love that expresses itself through shared obsession with something genuinely dangerous. The archival footage is extraordinary. The Crafts filming from distances that make the audience's palms sweat, collecting samples from active lava flows, sitting at the edges of craters. The documentary understands that the footage is not separate from the love story, but is its expression. That what the Crafts were doing when they filmed the volcanoes was performing their relationship for each other, a shared language made of fire and geological time. Fire of Love was one of the most acclaimed documentaries of its year and is available on Disney Plus with significantly less visibility than it deserves. From a love expressed through shared devotion to something dangerous, what follows is about a teacher whose devotion is expressed through proximity to something much quieter but equally demanding. Number 11. Beyond the Blackboard, 2011. Stacey Bess is a young teacher fresh from college who accepts a job at a school operating out of a shelter for homeless families in Salt Lake City, a position she took partly because it was the only offer available, and which she proceeded to treat with a seriousness and creativity that transformed the makeshift facility into a genuine learning environment for children whose lives outside the classroom were conditions that most formal educational systems have no capacity to address. The film is based on Bess's memoir and stars Emily Van Camp in a performance of grounded, practical compassion. Beyond the Blackboard operates in the register of inspirational true story drama. Without the sentimentality that typically accompanies the form, it is honest about the limits of what a single dedicated teacher can do, and honest about the specific hardship of the children it depicts, while still finding genuine hope in the day-to-day accumulation of small dignities. Available on streaming with almost no visibility outside the educational drama audience. From a teacher building community in the margins, what follows is about a man trying to reclaim his community in a city that has changed around him without his consent. Number 12. The Last Black Man in San Francisco, 2019. Jimmy Fails has a specific conviction. The Victorian house in the Fillmore district where he grew up was built by his grandfather, and despite the fact that he cannot live there, despite the fact that the neighborhood has been transformed by gentrification until it no longer resembles the place his grandfather built for, despite all material evidence that the house is simply not his, he maintains a relationship with it. Joe Talbot's film, co-written with Fales from Fales's own story, is a poem more than a narrative, organized around the specific feelings that places generate in the people who have loved them. Jonathan Majors as Jimmy's best friend Mont provides the film's philosophical counterweight, a playwright who observes the city with a detached, curious love that complements Jimmy's more proprietorial grief. The Last Black Man in San Francisco is about gentrification, but not in the way that films about gentrification typically are. It is about the interior experience of watching the city where you became yourself become legible only to people who arrived after you. From a man's relationship to a city changing around him, what follows is about two men whose relationship to a specific landscape becomes a test of everything they thought they knew about each other. Number 13. Calibre, 2018. Vaughn and Marcus drive north to the Scottish Highlands for a hunting weekend, a tradition between two childhood friends whose lives have diverged in the usual ways. An accident occurs on the first morning. They make a decision about the accident, and then the small, close-knit community around them begins, with the specific attentiveness of people who know their territory intimately, to notice discrepancies in what the two men are telling them. Matt Palmer's Scottish thriller is one of the most formally accomplished British horror-adjacent films of its year. A film about guilt and its physical weight, about how much of what we call morality is actually about being watched. Jack Lowden and Martin McCann play the friends with a chemistry that makes the bond between them feel genuinely historical, which is essential because the film's entire moral architecture rests on what each man's loyalty to the other will or will not allow him to do. Calibre is lean, cold, and completely committed to following its premise all the way to its conclusion. From two friends whose hunting trip exposes the limits of their loyalty to each other, what follows is about a couple whose retreat to repair their relationship exposes something considerably stranger. Number 14. The One I Love, 2014. Sophie and Ethan go to a remote retreat house recommended by their therapist as a last attempt to rescue their struggling relationship. They find that the guest cottage on the property has a quality that they cannot immediately explain and then cannot make sense of even after they explain it. Charlie McDowell's film is a romantic science fiction mystery that earns its genre ambitions by keeping the relationship drama as compelling as the speculative element. The strangeness of the situation at the retreat would not matter if the audience did not already care about whether Sophie and Ethan can be salvaged. Mark Duplass and Elizabeth Moss are exactly right together. A couple whose specific dynamics and whose specific damage come through in the film's early scenes with enough clarity that what the retreat reveals about them feels like a natural extension of what the audience already knew. The One I Love is clever, emotionally honest, and formally inventive without allowing any of those qualities to dominate the others. From a couple's strange discovery at a retreat house, what follows is considerably less intimate. An Iraqi Special Operations Unit fighting through the ruins of a city, inspired by real events and real people. Number 15. Mosul, 2019. A young police officer in Mosul is rescued from an ISIS ambush by the Nineveh SWAT unit, a team of Iraqi special forces whose mission, composition, and methods are unlike any conventional military operation. Directed by Matthew Michael Carnahan and produced by Joe and Anthony Russo, Mosul follows the unit through a single day's operation with the documentary intensity of a film that has been given access to how this specific kind of fight actually works. The tactics, the language, the relationships between men who have been fighting this battle long enough that it has become the defining condition of their existence. Adam Bessa and Suhail Dabak anchor an ensemble that the film gives enough time to characterize that the violence carries genuine weight. Mosul is in Arabic throughout. Shot on location in Morocco with a visual language that prioritizes the specificity of the environment over the legibility of the genre. One of the most underappreciated war films of its year, available on Netflix where it was quietly released without the conversation it deserved. From soldiers fighting through a ruined city, what follows is about a different kind of institutional confinement. A man navigating a care home that has its own hierarchy of power and terror. Number 16. The Rule of Jenny Penn, 2024. A retired judge suffers a stroke and is placed in a residential care facility where the other patients are an assortment of elderly people whose various degrees of cognitive and physical impairment have placed them in a setting that is officially about care and unofficially about containment. One of the residents, a former entertainer named Freddie Metz, who operates under the persona of Jenny Penn, runs the facility's informal power structure with a sadism that the staff either cannot see or cannot address. James Ashcroft's film is a psychological thriller about the specific horror of powerlessness in an institutional setting. Jeffrey Rush as the judge and John Lithgow as Freddie Metz bring to the film an intensity of professional rivalry that makes their exchanges genuinely alarming. Two actors operating at the absolute limits of what the material allows. The film is disturbing in ways that the standard thriller format does not typically access. The horror here is domestic, quotidian, and completely out of reach of any conventional rescue. Available on streaming and generating far too little conversation. From a care home's brutal informal hierarchy, what follows is about a different kind of institutional trap. A young man who cannot leave the labor system he has entered. Number 17. 7 Prisoners, 2021. Mateus is 18 years old from a small town in the Brazilian interior and has been offered a job in São Paulo that promises wages his family has never seen. He arrives to find that the job is real, but the freedom associated with it is not. Luca, the scrap metal dealer who employed him, has been running a debt bondage operation that keeps young men from the interior in a state of permanent obligation, their wages always slightly less than what they owe. Alexandra Morato's film is a social thriller of considerable precision, organized around the specific mechanics of how labor trafficking actually works and what options are available to someone inside it. Christian Maleros as Mateus and Rodrigo Santoro as Luca generate a relationship of mutual exploitation that the film refuses to simplify. Luca is not a cartoon villain, but a man operating within a system that has shaped him as much as it has shaped his victims. 7 Prisoners is available on Netflix, where it was largely overlooked despite being one of the most morally precise Brazilian films of its year. From a young man trapped in a labor system with no exit, what follows moves to a different kind of entrapment. A 1950s American town where 2 young people have noticed something in the sky and cannot stop following it. Number 18. The Vast of Night, 2019. Cayuga, New Mexico, 1950s. Everybody is at the basketball game. Radio DJ Everett and 16-year-old switchboard operator Faye are the 2 people in town who are not at the game and who happen to be paying close enough attention when a strange audio frequency appears on the radio signal. Andrew Patterson's debut feature is a Twilight Zone episode, extended to feature length with a visual bravura that the television format could never have achieved. Long, unbroken tracking shots through the empty town, a complete commitment to the period's aesthetic and audio language, and a pacing that rewards the audience willing to let the mystery develop at its own speed. Sierra McCormick and Jake Horowitz carry the film on performances of genuine period specificity, and the film's climax achieves something rare, a sense of wonder and dread operating simultaneously, neither canceling the other. The Vast of Night is available on Amazon Prime and has been building a devoted audience through word of mouth since its 2019 release. From a 1950s sci-fi mystery, what follows is a documentary about an investigation into a completely unknown environment and what it costs the people who attempt it. Number 19. Diving into the Unknown, 2016. A group of Finnish cave divers are on an expedition in an unexplored cave system in Norway when 2 of their team members fail to return from a dive and are presumed dead. The survivors face a choice that has no good option: leave the bodies in the cave or attempt a retrieval that is so dangerous that it has never been attempted and that every expert they consult advises against. Juan Reyna's documentary follows the surviving divers as they train for the retrieval mission, execute it, and process what the entire experience has done to them. Diving into the Unknown is a film about the specific ethics of loyalty and risk, about what you owe the people you lost, about what you are allowed to risk in service of that debt, and about the particular culture of cave diving, which appears from the outside as pure recklessness, but is understood from the inside as a precise technical practice with a very specific relationship to mortality. One of the most gripping documentaries of the past decade, available on streaming and widely underdiscovered. From Finnish cave divers navigating a vast unknown underground, what follows navigates a different kind of vastness, two men wandering through a play they did not write, trying to make sense of a story that was never about them. Number 20. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, 1990. Two minor characters from Shakespeare's Hamlet spend most of their existence waiting in antechambers, tossing coins that always land heads up, engaging in philosophical conversation about mortality and meaning, and occasionally being summoned into the main action of the play that is not about them. Tom Stoppard adapts his own 1966 stage play for the screen and has the resources to show the full scope of Hamlet's court while keeping the camera's primary attention on the two men who exist at its margins. Gary Oldman and Tim Roth as Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are the film's entire argument made flesh. Two intelligent, anxious, fundamentally decent people navigating an existence they did not choose with the resources available to them, which are inadequate. Richard Dreyfuss as the Player King provides the film's most explicitly philosophical counterpoint. Stoppard's dialogue has not aged. The question of what it means to be a minor character in someone else's major story has, if anything, grown more resonant since 1966. Available on streaming and regularly rediscovered by each generation that encounters it. 20 films across 6 decades and 14 countries, all of them sitting in streaming catalogs with less conversation around them than they deserve. A Taiwanese family drama that should be in the same breath as the great family films. A Danish emergency dispatcher whose single-room film generates more tension than most action blockbusters. Volcanologists who died filming the thing they loved. Two men from Shakespeare who cannot figure out what story they are in. If even one of these is going on the watch list tonight, the channel did its job. More lists, more buried films, more reasons to look past the algorithm's first 2 rows. I'll be here.